I'm here with Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller, the former co-hosts of Effectively Wild and co-authors of the book The Only Rule Is It Has to Work, which details Ben and Sam's 2015 season, incorporating advanced analytics while working with the Sonoma Stompers. You can currently find Sam's work under Pebble Hunting on Substack, where he shares his baseball writing, while Ben is still co-hosting Effectively Wild, and is a senior writer for The Ringer, and he now hosts a podcast with Meg Rowley. But today, as much as I'd just like to talk baseball with you guys for the next 40 minutes, we will be talking about your time with Sonoma. And for those that haven't read the book, can you guys just talk a little bit more about what you did for the Stompers and your experience there?
Sure. Uh, we Ben and I at the time were hosting a podcast together, and had been working together at Baseball Prospectus, which is a kind of analytics think tank, or has been for a long time. Ben was the editor in chief, and I was working under him, and then he left, and I became the editor in chief. Anyway, we had this idea that we should put our fancy ideas into practice, so we pitched it to an independent baseball team, which was the Sonoma Stompers, and said, "Hey, we'll make your team the best, minor league baseball team in the world if you just give us free reign." And we went out for a summer and did what we could. Well, I mean, we we did what we thought we could, and then we left and wrote a book about it. So that's the simple answer.
And you guys obviously you talked a little about your paths to get there. What did you take away from your time there?
Well, I guess how much we struggled initially. We kind of came in thinking we knew things about baseball, and we did know some things, I suppose, but we didn't know all that much about actually being the GMs or quasi GMs or baseball operations executives of an actual professional baseball team. And it took us quite a while to get up to speed and figure out what we were doing if we ever reached that point. So I think we underestimated that and probably underestimated the difficulty of a short season, just a 3-month summer season at the time, and how much we would be able to conclude about that using technology and data and analysis. And I guess to some extent, we anticipated that we would have some hurdles and difficulties and hiccups with just setting up our whole infrastructure and relating to people on the team, which turned out to be a big challenge. And I guess we were glad that it did to some extent because it made a better story with some conflict and drama. But it was somewhat stressful at the time as we were flailing about to try to figure out what value we could actually add to that team and how we fit into the roster in a sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my takeaway is that everything in life is persuasion. It turns out that it's not it's not primarily about even being right. It's about being able to relate to people and get like kind of consensus. Consensus maybe isn't the right word. It doesn't always apply. Doesn't always have to be consensus. But like the primary obstacle and the primary resource that you have in every situation is the relationships that you have with the people around you. And we were like that was what made the season fun and the project fun and interesting, and learned a lot. But it also is what made us realize that we probably could have used like 10 years to really keep going with it before we would have like been good at it.
And you guys talked about how there was that adjustment period, and everybody sits on their couch watching a baseball game and assume they would make every right decision and they could build a roster better than their favorite GM. What were more of the specific challenges you guys faced when you were thrown into the fray like that and you actually had that opportunity that probably everybody wants to run a baseball team?
Initially, I guess just populating the roster and finding players, which was kind of intoxicating at first to think that we had the power to make people professional baseball players. who hadn't been and might not otherwise be. But it was also sort of scary to realize that we actually had to find them somewhere. So there was just a very brief celebration when this all became official and we got a book deal and we knew we were doing this, and then had to confront how out of our depth we were. Um, and that started right away when we were trying to find a manager who turned out to be a player manager. I was still across the country at the time because I'm from New York and moved out to Sonoma for the summer. So I was sort of participating from afar by proxy at first. And then once we got out there, we realized that a lot of teams at that level are filled just through connections and people just combing through their contacts and calling up people they've played with before. Whereas we were trying to recruit people without having any kind of connections, just sight unseen in many cases through data analysis and through spreadsheets and names that just rose to the top when we sorted certain columns. So that was daunting, I think, to realize that at least in the time that we had, it was difficult for us to do that and that we were taking some real risks. That actually turned out to be maybe the most rewarding part of the experience, is that we were able to give at least a few guys a shot at being pro baseball players. They can always say that they were pro baseball players. A couple guys even got signed by major league organizations and had brief affiliated ball careers, which was really cool. So that was, I guess, sort of just the first hurdle that we faced and sort of stumbled on.
So you guys obviously have moved on into larger things throughout your career. Why didn't either of you decide to pursue the front office route after you had that taste in Sonoma?
um, did we have that taste? We had a very we had a very specific flavor of that experience. I wouldn't say that it is the normal or the sort of like the common one that like people have when they dream of going into front office work. We were, for one thing, we were not, normally if you work for a front office, like say if your dream is to be the Braves scouting director, you start out with like 80 bosses above you and you just gradually move up one boss at a time until you only have 6 bosses above you. Whereas when we were in Sonoma, we were just kind of like at summer camp. We got to be the bosses and uh, uh, like mess up however we wanted to. So I would not say that we got the full experience that people had, but I don't know. I mean, it was never really either of our dreams at that point. We both were like writers mostly in our minds. And I don't think either of us went in thinking this was going to be a stepping stone to getting into the game in that way. We liked what we did, and what we really wanted to do was apply what we did to this field, this arena that we wrote about, not necessarily like move to the arena all the time. We wanted to apply our identities to the sport rather than change our identities.
Yeah, it was something I had aspired to before the Stompers experience. I did some internships and thought maybe I would try to go down that road. And I'm glad I got a taste of it, but I think I wasn't that well suited to it and have been better suited to the things I ended up doing. So by the time we got to Sonoma, I was more excited about just getting to chronicle this experience than I was to use it as some sort of springboard into baseball. But I guess Sam had a opportunity, right, to come back. You had an offer of some sort that we kind of ended the book on. Um, you may be managing at some point in the future that you at least considered sort of weighed at the time, but
Even then, I think probably I was thinking we could write well, actually, I was going to say we could write a second book, but even more than that, that was, how writers are. They procrastinate on everything until they like absolutely have to write. And I think at that point in the season, I was realizing with Tara that we were going to have to write a book. And the idea of coming back for a second summer in a different role was a way of not having to write for a whole nother year. Like we could just we could just make it a 2-year book and then we wouldn't have to write for a whole year. So it's not like I ever aspired to be a manager in baseball at all. I aspired to do what I'm doing. And this was like a way of, like taking on a like a once in a lifetime opportunity to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
Ben
did.
stole my next question. It was going to be you explained pretty well in that letter at the end of the book why you had to decline Theo's offer of you being the manager. Was it just that was never your dream? What was it ever really in the cards for you? And was that even really a discussion of accepting that job?
Um, well, it was definitely never my dream. And it depended on, I mean, I kind of had to decide whether it was realistic for me to spend another summer of my life in make believe land, which is kind of what like that was what that summer was. It was like it was a break from what we were doing. It was like we detoured off of the kind of like boring lives we were living and went and did this adventure, which is honestly like what a lot of the Stompers players are doing. Like they have like they get the summer to go like pursue this dream, and for 3 months they're doing it, and every day they have like the excitement and the stakes and the camaraderie of being involved in baseball as they're pursuing their dream of moving on up. But like it's not necessarily their whole life or their whole living, in a lot of cases. And so it was really kind of like, I mean, I would have had a great time. I think I would have made a lot of new mistakes. It would have been funny, and weird and enjoyable. And it was just kind of like, do I have, like, am I at that stage in my life still? And ultimately I decided that I wasn't at the stage in my life to give another summer to it, which is I think what a lot of Stompers or players, baseball players at every level, are interrogating themselves on every year at the end of the year. Do I have another summer in me? And every year, 10 or 20% of baseball players, professional baseball players, make the decision that like they're being, they've reached the end. And for me, that was my end. I wasn't gonna become like a great baseball manager. I wasn't gonna be doing it till I was 65. I was gonna be horrible at it for 1 year. And it was best that I not do that. It was best for everyone that I not do that.
We did envision it as a franchise initially, like we would do the first year and then maybe Baseball Prospectus would do the second year, or there'd be another book or something. I don't know exactly why we never pursued that. Maybe it was just we were too wrapped up in our own book, and it wasn't our problem what happened after that. But I guess if the book had sold as well as Moneyball or something, there probably would have been the only rule is it has to work too, and someone else would have gotten to take their crack at it and done it differently. But I'm sure it would have gone more smoothly in some ways if we had done it again or had a do-over, which at one point in the season we were kind of considering maybe we just scrap this and try again next year. It would have been a different book and probably not a better book.
Ben, you worked obviously before Sonoma in the Yankees organization, and obviously those are two vastly different. But other than the market shift, what were the big differences you saw between independent league and obviously in a much more expanded role with the Stompers than being a smaller piece of a bigger organization in the Yankees?
Yeah, I mean there was almost no similarity, I guess, so it'd be hard to list the differences, but I
Marijuana.
yeah, um,
Oh, geez. Did I just ruin your? I know. Have I ruined this as promotional material? California.
yeah, I was with the Yankees in 2009, 2010. So 2009 they won the World Series, and I got that whole experience, which is also written about a bit in the book. But just, being a fly on the wall more than a real contributor to anything. There's a scene in the book where I'm just riding on the duck boat in the ticker tape parade, and people are throwing toilet paper at me and my fellow interns and chanting, "Who are you?" because no one knew who we were, nor should they have. So it was, yeah, it was a very, very, very small fish in the biggest baseball pond at that point. So it was diametric opposites almost to go from that someone who had no decision making power, barely any input whatsoever, but was sort of there in the room while things were happening, to being in a much smaller pond, but at least theoretically having almost ultimate authority over everything. So very different in almost every respect. And I guess especially in the fact that no one really knew what we were doing with the Stompers and no one was aware of how the Stompers were doing. Even, I mean, people who listened to our podcast maybe and knew that we were writing a book about it had some peripheral awareness, I guess, of how the season was going, but barely anyone knew what contributions we were making. We hardly knew what contributions we were making at some points. Um, and so it was almost like, I was almost worried about like, will the outcome be spoiled by the time the book comes out? Because we're writing about last season and there won't be any suspense. But of course, no one knew whether the Stompers had won the Pacific Association title or what contribution we had made to that effort. So it was public, but almost completely private outside of the very small sphere of Sonoma.
You guys didn't agree on everything throughout the summer, as is detailed multiple times in the book, including the opening day batting order. How did you guys work through that? You had a relationship prior, and then obviously worked together the whole summer. How did you guys talk through those decisions when you weren't seeing eye to eye?
Um, I don't know.
Probably not
We didn't.
enough. I don't know.
We didn't really.
Not
We
much.
yeah. I don't know. It's the same way I yeah, we didn't. It was just kind of like whoever was still talking at the end would get their way. Is whoever had more energy for the argument would get their way. It was all we were tired by like the third day, and we were we there were a lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments uh, between everyone and everyone, and so there wasn't a lot of resolution. There was just like we'll argue for a while, and then the argument will taper off, and then like you'll look up and see what happened. Yeah, I don't know. Great question in the sense that like it's not answerable.
Yeah. Yeah. There probably would have been some way to like hash out differences more productively, but I think in the end, like I guess we each got to try our favorite approach or synthesize them or blend them to some extent, at least by the end of the season. So, um, and neither of us knew what we were doing really. So it wasn't like one of us had the answers and the other was resistant to the right way to do things. Like, we blended, I guess, in some way, the way that we blended the book and two different people and two different decision makers and two different voices. And hopefully it made it all more compelling.
We still don't really know like on the things that we disagreed with. They weren't simple questions. The things that we disagreed with are the same things that you disagree in your own mind all the time, like where you struggle in your own mind about how are other people going to relate to this thing, what's going to make me like what's going to improve my status among this large group of people, which is just a complicated thing that doesn't really have any answers. There's just so much ambiguity in that stuff. So usually when we would disagree, it was like, well, is so and so going to get mad, basically? And we would disagree about whether so and so was going to get mad, and who knows? And who knows whether it's important whether they get mad? Who You can't control how you're going to respond to things even after they've been put into play and given a chance to work out. So I think that part of the reason that we would just argue for a while and then let it taper out is that this was not like looking at a hitter's spray chart and trying to find the mathematically correct answer. It was like disagreement over whether a person liked us enough to like listen to a thing. And like who knows, you never know. We still don't know.
Sam, you talked about it in the last question and in the book, just the feeling of being tired, exhausted, especially by the dog days of August. You say you felt like your life lacked impact and you didn't feel like what you were doing was enough on such a small scale. How did you work through that and still find it fulfilling at the end of the summer?
Oh wow. Oh man, I don't know if I solved that. I remember I did at one point I took a day that I just didn't go to work. And that helped. That like I felt like I needed that as a way of like asserting some control over my life. But I mean, really, it was just looking to the fact that it was going to end. We knew it was finite, and we knew it was going to be really sad when it ended. And so you would just kind of remember, like, okay, there's 17 days left, and you would simultaneously be going, okay, only 17 days, I can make it. Like doing that, encouragement, but also like, there's only 17 days. Like, don't waste this. This is like, going to be a memorable time in your life, and also good content for the book that you have to start writing the day after the season ends. And so that would keep you focused. I think that in some ways, our the nice thing is that we didn't know anybody before the season started, and so all these relationships with the various people, the players, the owner, the GM, all these people, we're starting at zero. And so throughout the course of the summer, you'd get closer to certain people. And by August, a lot of what kept you going is just that now you had like pretty durable relationships with a number of people on the team, and you'd show up and you'd be like happy to see them. And you'd have a long day at the office, but you'd be like hanging out with them and learning more about them. And that was a really, like, I would say, like an energizing feature of it. I think if we'd been doing this, like, say, if we had been doing this remotely for a team in, like Australia, I mean, we wouldn't have had that, and it would have been like really, in certain ways, isolating and bleak. And in fact, like in person in the dirt with the people in the dugout, it was the exact opposite of that. You were getting energy, which is interesting. I don't think Ben or I is a natural extrovert, but I think we both got energy from sort of being forced into extroversion for those months. Um, I would feel I'd feel good those 9 hours. It was the drive there and the drive back, and waking up in the morning the next day and having to do the drive. There was a lot of driving. There was the games where I was scouting non-Stompers games, like alone in cold Vallejo. Like those were a lot tougher, but going to the park itself was pretty much going to Sonoma, going to the Stompers games was pretty much always in some ways fun once you got there. I mean, I mentioned summer camp earlier. Like it really did feel a lot like summer camp in ways.
Yeah, my memories of that summer are a combination of very warm, fuzzy, fond nostalgia sort of summer camp experience, and also just like anxiety and exhaustion and stress, just because I was doing my day job for some reason that was not smart. And also, I mean, Sam was married with a kid, which I was not at the time, but also my then girlfriend, now wife, had moved out with me for the summer. And so I didn't want to ignore her after she had moved out across the country to support me in this venture. And I didn't even know how to drive at the time, really. I mean, I still don't. I got a learner's permit that summer and barely used it. And my wife would just, then girlfriend, would drive me around everywhere, which I felt guilty about, but I had to get there somehow, and just always felt kind of overwhelmed. Felt like the time was slipping away, and that we were supposed to be working on the book because we had thought that we would be. We would just go home from the park and write as the season proceeded, and that didn't happen at all. We really didn't write a page or a word until the season was over. So yes, it was wonderful, but also like really exhausting. So I kind of wish I could do it again, but also I'm relieved that it's over.
Early on, you had a meeting with Fett, and he said you guys never played. Was that a reaction you got a lot from the players and the few managers you went through during the season? Obviously, now it's much more commonplace of every team has such a large advanced analytics department. But at the time and at that level, about you not being a player, how did that affect people's perspectives of you, at least at the beginning?
Um, I we anticipated that it would be, and I would say that on the surface it was, but I'm not sure that it was so much that we hadn't played as that we were just like culturally very dissimilar from the players. Um, we were like I don't know. I don't exactly know how to put this, but we had philosophical differences um in baseball and like kind of just in life, and we leaned on different like histories to make our decisions, and like we were dorky and out of shape, and those things all like kind of they all come into play when you're trying to like sort of like use your charisma to persuade people or to get them to trust you. If you don't have charisma that they respond to, then it's going to show up in the disagreements that you have. Like it's going to be like you're just not going to get their trust right away. And so we didn't play, but it's also I don't think a coincidence that the players that we tended to have the best relationships were the ones who, like, aside from being baseball players, we had the most in common with, that we like, I don't know, just sort of like spoke, thought, read, listened to things in slightly similar ways. So that is all to say that I'm not sure that not playing was the primary problem. I think it was just being dorks. Like, I think if we'd come from a background of being like cool, confident, real, like whatever, cool people, it would have been fine. But not, I mean, not totally fine. Like there still would have been disagreements, but finer. There's a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I always mention this, and Ben has heard me say this, I think, in several hundred podcast episodes. But I think there's a reason why everybody in the front office of major league organizations works out all the time. They don't have to. They're not players. They could be out of shape to do their jobs, but they all work out. Everybody's in great shape, and it's because to get the players to credit you with like being a like put together human being, you have to sort of like succeed on their terms. And one of their terms is like be in shape, like have, like work out, like go to the gym. So anyway, that's kind of an analogy, but also kind of literally like that was a factor. Like we were like, you know, not, we're not in shape. Like Ben was in shape, I guess. Ben, did they think you were in shape? I was not in shape.
Yeah, I don't think it was physical fitness that was an issue so much as just like wearing corduroys and
Yeah.
taking notes in the dugout and,
Yeah.
just being a nerd generally.
I would
Yeah.
read the New Yorker like on the bench. And then I'd want to talk to them about the thing I'd been reading.
Yeah, which I mean, we knew that was going to be a culture clash. That was like part of our pitch for the project, at least to the publisher, is, fish out of water, nerds, jocks, meeting of minds, clash of cultures sort of thing. So we came prepared for that, I guess. Not that it made us any better at it, but we just knew that it was going to be an issue and felt that we had to justify our presence there somehow, which, from the very start, I think when Sam first talked to the team at some meeting and was, trying to explain what we were doing there and how we could help them, that was a big thing. Like, how can we possibly help them with our experience? And here are some fancy gizmos and gadgets that you don't usually have at this level that these players hadn't been exposed to. And hey, you can look at video of your at bats and you can get yourself clocked on the radar gun or whatever, stuff like that, that at upper levels is not anything unusual, but for these players was still kind of cool and felt big league. So that was the way that we contributed initially or justified our presence in this inner sanctum for athletes.
As much as I'd like to sit here and talk baseball all day, we are running up on time a little bit. So my last question to you guys would be, maybe this was just a throwaway line at the end of the book that caught my eye, but you said we wouldn't have traded the Parker home run for Santos and Stoops signings. I feel like that sort of really got to the heart of what you guys were doing there. Was it really mainly focused on getting these guys to the next level over winning the Pacific Association in the 2015 summer?
I mean, we definitely meant that when we wrote it, and I would still say it's true. So then to explain why a little bit, yeah, I mean, look, it's all make believe, right? Like everything that happens in sports is make believe. Like it doesn't really matter, and you're playing. When you go out there, what you're really doing is you're basically trying to test yourself as a person, against against other people and against challenges. And we had a sort of specific set of challenges that applied to us, but that maybe don't always apply to the players, but we could relate to them. They were out there to improve, to maybe move up, to pursue a dream that they were not quite ready to give up on. And they'd been pursuing this dream for 20 years, and this was in some cases their really their last chance. And we realized quite quickly that that was the overlap, and that was the true stakes of the summer, of our summer and of their summer. And so, like, definitely 100%, like, we realized somewhere through at some point during the summer that what would make the season really successful and exceptional for us would be if we were able to help a player make it to, affiliated ball. That is like, that's the prize. Winning the league is not, ultimately not the prize that's going to last your whole life. Whereas I think that making affiliated ball for these guys was the life goal. And so yeah, I mean, I would, I think that, yeah, we had that conversation. I think maybe when Sean Conroy was getting scouted by the A's, that was I think that was one of the first, really, 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 okay, we can say that this season was a success because scouts came out to see Sean. But I mean, 100 times more. I went out to see Dylan Stoops pitch for the San Diego Padres high A team the next summer. And in some ways, that's the best memory of the whole project for me, to see him out there pitching. It's incredible. And so, yeah, I wouldn't trade that for, a perfect season.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I wonder what those guys think of that now after some time has passed. If they look back on that as, special, do they think fondly of that experience? Because ultimately, even Santos and Dylan, who got signed, they didn't go on to have long, distinguished professional careers or anything, but they got there, which is something that not a lot of people can say, and wouldn't have happened, I don't think, if we had not given them a call. So I wonder if they still look back on that fondly or pride themselves on that. And if they do, that would be very gratifying for us, I think. So yeah, there was part of it that, we felt some vindication because, hey, we had spotted talent in these guys that teams actually deemed them worthy of a roster spot somewhere, however briefly. And that was just because we had looked and seen their names on a spreadsheet and sorted some stats, and their names were at the top. And that was cool. That made it feel like we were onto something, that we were finding these unappreciated players. But better, I think, if it's, something that they look back on and think, that summer or those summers that I was a professional baseball player, that's really cool. I'm glad that happened. So I'm glad we did what we did, if they're still glad that they did that.
Thank you so much to Ben and Sam for taking the time. You can check out Effectively Wild anywhere you get your podcasts. You can go back and listen to episodes from years ago when they were together, like I do. You can buy The Only Rule Is It Has to Work on Amazon or anywhere else you buy your books. And Stompers opening day is coming up May 30th. Come out to Arnold Field and support. Thanks, guys.